After a shelter dog gave birth to a strange puppy, something shocking happened. At first, it seemed like just another rescue, a stray bringing new life into the world. But one look at this puppy stopped everyone cold. Its eyes didn't match. Its body looked different. And suddenly, powerful people showed up demanding what wasn't theirs. Why would anyone fight so hard for a fragile newborn pup? What secret could this tiny creature possibly hold? A secret so dangerous it could cost lives. As threats close in and hidden truths claw their way to the surface, one question remains: what is this strange puppy really worth, and who will risk everything to protect it? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The early morning quiet of Cedar Trace Animal Shelter was broken only by the soft whimpers of a dog in labor. Greer Lansing knelt beside the makeshift whelping box, her knees pressed against the cold concrete floor. Her weathered hands gently stroked Sparrow's golden fur, offering what comfort she could to the trembling stray. "You're doing great, girl," Greer whispered, noting how the dog's amber eyes sought hers trustingly despite the obvious pain. Sparrow's thin body bore the marks of a hard life, scars beneath matted fur and ribs that showed too prominently. But there was a gentle spirit in those eyes that had drawn Greer to her from the moment animal control brought her in. The first puppy arrived just as sunrise painted the shelter windows in soft pink. Greer worked efficiently, clearing airways and helping the tiny creature find its way to nurse. Two more followed in quick succession, typical shepherd mix pups with dark fur and sturdy builds. But the fourth puppy made Greer pause. As she cleaned away the birth membrane, she found herself staring at a creature unlike its siblings. Where they were compact and dark, this one was long-limbed and ash-gray. Most striking were its eyes, which blinked open briefly, one ice blue, one amber, like fragments of two different skies. "Well, aren't you something special?" Greer murmured, examining the pup more closely. Her trained eye noted every unusual feature as she reached for her intake clipboard. "I'll call you Flint," she decided, printing the name carefully on her forms. Something about those mismatched eyes nagged at her memory, but before she could chase down the thought, heavy footsteps echoed in the shelter's front corridor. The main entrance wasn't due to open for another hour. Greer rose, joints protesting after hours on the concrete, and made her way to the front. She recognized the man waiting there immediately, everyone in Cedar. Trace knew Harlan Pierce. He filled the doorway with his broad-shouldered frame, dressed in expensive ranch wear that somehow still carried an air of threat rather than prosperity. His steel-gray hair was perfectly groomed, but his eyes were sharp and cold as he fixed them on Greer. "I've come for my dogs," he announced without preamble. Greer stood straighter, though she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce, but I'm not sure what you mean. We haven't received any reports of missing dogs from your preserve. That female you took in, she's one of mine, wandered off my property a few weeks back. Her and her pups belong to me." His tone carried the weight of someone unused to being questioned. Greer's heart rate picked up, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, Sparrow came to us as a stray. If you're claiming ownership, we'll need to see documentation, vaccination records, registration papers, photos showing your history with the dog." Pierce's face hardened. "Now listen here, girl. I don't think you understand who you're talking to. That dog is my property, and I don't need papers to prove what everyone in this county knows. Everything that crosses my land belongs to me." The threat in his voice was barely veiled, but Greer stood her ground. Years of handling difficult situations in search and rescue had taught her to trust her instincts, and everything about this man set off warning bells. "I understand who you are, Mr. Pierce," she replied calmly, "but I have to follow shelter policy. Without proof of ownership, all strays must complete a mandatory hold period. After that, they'll be evaluated for adoption eligibility. Pierce took a step closer, using his height to loom over her. "You're making a mistake, Miss Lansing. A serious one. People around here know better than to cross me. Is there a problem?" A new voice cut through the tension. Boone Ellery appeared in the doorway, his animal control officer's uniform dusty from early morning rounds. His weathered face was neutral, but his stance as he moved to stand near Greer spoke volumes. Pierce's expression flickered before settling into a cold smile. "No problem. Just a misunderstanding that Miss Lansing will soon realize she wants to correct." He turned on his heel and strode out, boots echoing on the linoleum. "You okay?" Boone asked quietly once Pierce was gone. Greer let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Yeah, but something's not right here, Boone. You should see one of these pups. I've never seen anything like it. And Pierce showing up like this. I trust your instincts," Boone said. "Document everything. I'll put in some calls, see what I can find out about any unusual breeding operations in the area." After Boone left, Greer returned to Sparrow and her pups. The mother dog had gathered all 4 babies close, but Greer noticed how she kept Flint tucked especially tight against her side. She began her intake notes, recording every detail with meticulous care: weights, markings, unusual features. When she reached Flint's entry, she added extra notes about his distinctive characteristics. The morning sun was fully up now, warming the concrete walls of the shelter, but Greer felt a persistent chill. She made her rounds, checking every lock twice, adding extra latches where she could. In the whelping area, she installed a motion sensor camera she usually saved for monitoring sick animals. Sparrow watched her with those soft amber eyes, and Greer paused to stroke her head. "Don't worry, girl. We'll figure this out." But as she looked down at Flint, his strange eyes now closed in sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that this little family, especially this unusual pup, was at the center of something dangerous. Something that Harlan Pierce was willing to threaten her to keep hidden. She picked up her phone and sent a detailed text to Boone, documenting Pierce's visit and her concerns. Then she pulled up a chair near the whelping box, determined to keep watch until relief staff arrived. Outside, she could hear the first birds of morning, but their songs did little to ease her sense of foreboding. Whatever secrets lay behind Flint's mysterious appearance and Pierce's aggressive claim, Greer knew she had just drawn a line in the sand, one that would have consequences she couldn't yet imagine. The acrid smell of smoke jerked Greer awake from her small cot in the shelter's back room. Her eyes stung as dark wisps crept under the door, and the familiar night sounds of the shelter were replaced by an ominous crackling. Heart pounding, she grabbed her phone and keys, dropping to her hands and knees where the air was clearest. The orange glow from the office painted twisted shadows on the walls. Through the thickening smoke, she could hear Sparrow's anxious whines mixing with the frightened barks of other shelter animals. The whelping pen was on the far side of the building, past the spreading flames. "Hold on," she wheezed, crawling toward the supply room. The smoke burned her throat as she soaked several towels in the utility sink. Water dripped down her arms as she wrapped one around her face, clutching the others to her chest. The heat intensified as she inched through the corridor. Flames licked up the walls, consuming papers and files. The ceiling groaned ominously overhead. Greer forced herself forward, counting doors until she reached the whelping room. Sparrow was standing protectively over her pups, who were mewling in distress. "Come here, girl," Greer called hoarsely, holding out one dripping towel. The mother dog hesitated only a moment before trusting her, allowing Greer to wrap her and 2 pups in the wet fabric. "This way," Greer urged, guiding them toward the side exit she'd propped open. The metal door handle seared her palm, but she barely registered the pain. After depositing Sparrow and the first pup safely outside, she dove back in. The ceiling creaked and shifted above her as she made 2 more trips, her lungs screaming for clean air. Finally, only Flint remained, tucked in the corner of the pen. The unique pup's mismatched eyes reflected the flames as Greer scooped him up. A thunderous crack split the air. Greer curled her body around Flint as debris rained down, barely making it through the door as part of the roof collapsed behind them. In the distance, sirens wailed their approach. She sat in the grass, coughing violently, her blistered hands trembling as she counted the pups. All present, all breathing. Sparrow nuzzled her singed sleeve, and Greer buried her face in the dog's damp fur. Letting tears of relief fall. Dawn painted the sky in pale pinks as Greer sat in Boone Ellery's office, her hands bandaged, voice rough from smoke. The animal control officer's weathered face was grim as she detailed the night's events. This wasn't an accident, Boone stated, making careful notes. The timing's too convenient after Pierce's visit. He leaned back, studying her. I'm bringing in some help. There's a state wildlife biologist who needs to see that unusual pup of yours. Later that morning, Rhett Marlowe arrived, his lean frame carrying an air of quiet authority despite his casual field gear. He knelt beside the temporary pen where Greer had relocated the litter, adjusting his glasses as he observed Flint. These proportions, he murmured, gently measuring the pup's legs and head. His fingers traced the distinctive notch in Flint's ear. And this marking, it's consistent with certain wildlife tagging methods. He looked up at Greer, choosing his words carefully. There's a strong possibility of wolf ancestry here. Greer's breath caught. Would that explain Pierce's interest? Rhett nodded slowly. Hybrid breeding is strictly regulated. If someone's running an illegal operation, he retrieved a DNA sampling kit from his bag. With your permission? Do whatever you need to, Greer agreed, watching as he swabbed Flint's mouth and carefully sealed the sample. Her phone buzzed. A text from Boone. Pierce is moving fast, she read aloud, her voice tight. He's pushing for an emergency seizure order through Judge Matthews. Claims Sparrow and the pups are his escaped breeding stock. Matthews? Rhett's expression darkened. He's known for ruling in Pierce's favor. Then we document everything, Greer said firmly. She was already pulling out her laptop, creating detailed records of the fire, the rescue, and every interaction with the litter. Chain of custody, medical records, photos, witnesses, everything by the book. Working together, they relocated Sparrow and her pups to a secure foster facility Boone had arranged. Greer photographed each pup from multiple angles, recorded weights and markings, and logged every detail of their care. Her bandaged hands shook with exhaustion, but she refused to stop until everything was properly documented. You're putting yourself at risk, Rhett observed quietly as they finished the transfers. Pierce has a lot of influence in this county. Greer thought of the flames, of Sparrow's trust, of Flint's unusual eyes. Someone has to stand up to him, she replied. These animals deserve protection, and I'm not backing down. Boone arrived to review their documentation, adding his official observations. The fire investigation's already started, he informed them. And Rhett's DNA analysis will be fast-tracked through the state lab. We'll build this case right. No shortcuts Pierce's lawyers can exploit. Greer nodded, watching Sparrow settle her pups into their new temporary home. Her hands still stung from the burns, but her resolve had never been stronger. The fire that was meant to destroy evidence had instead forged something stronger, a determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The morning sunlight streamed through the shelter windows as Greer conducted her routine check of Sparrow and her litter. The mother dog lay contentedly in her clean pen, nursing her pups while Greer carefully documented their progress. Something caught her eye as she ran her hands gently over Sparrow's coat, a small, circular patch of healed skin on the dog's flank. That's odd, Greer murmured, parting the fur for a closer look. The mark was about the size of a pencil eraser, completely healed but distinctly different from typical scars. Her years of shelter work had taught her to recognize various kinds of injuries, and this one raised immediate red flags. It looked exactly like the kind of mark left by tranquilizer darts, her heart beating faster. Greer moved her examination to the pups, paying special attention to Flint. As she checked behind his ears, she noticed something she'd missed before, a faint blue stain on his skin, barely visible beneath his ash-gray fur. She'd seen similar markings before, during her training sessions with wildlife officials. It was the type of dye marker commonly used in research facilities and game preserves to track animals. Gray reached for her phone and quickly dialed Boone's number. Within 30 minutes, both he and Rhett arrived at the shelter, their faces grave as they examined her findings. "Look at this," Boone said, spreading out a stack of intake papers on the office desk. "I've been going through our records. Sparrow was found exactly 3 weeks ago. Right here." His finger traced along a highlighted line showing the location, a remote logging road that ran along the edge of Pierce's preserve. Rhett adjusted his glasses, leaning in to study the documents. "The timing matches perfectly with breeding season," he said quietly. "And that location, it's not just any part of Pierce's land. It borders one of the most isolated sections of the preserve." Greer felt her stomach tighten. "This isn't just about Pierce claiming ownership of a stray, is it? We're looking at something much bigger, an illegal breeding operation." Boone confirmed, his weathered face set in hard lines. "Using wild canids. The dart mark, the dye, the location. It all fits together like pieces of a puzzle we should have seen sooner." Rhett pulled out his tablet, showing them a series of satellite images of Pierce's preserve. "These areas here and here," he pointed to dense sections of forest, "would be perfect for hiding this kind of operation. Far from public trails, minimal oversight. But we need absolute proof." Greer insisted, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on Sparrow's head. The mother dog leaned into her touch, trusting and unaware of the growing tension in the room. "The DNA tests are still running," Rhett explained, his voice carrying both caution and concern. "We should have results within 48 hours. But," he hesitated, exchanging glances with Boone, "but we might not have that long," Boone finished. "Pierce has connections. I've heard through the grapevine that he's pushing for an emergency injunction. Once that goes through, we'll have no choice but to hand over Sparrow and the pups." Greer's protective instincts flared. "We can't let that happen. If this is really an illegal breeding operation, those pups are evidence. And more importantly, they're at risk." The three of them huddled closer, speaking in low voices as they formulated a plan. The state wildlife department had a secure facility about 2 hours away, a place where evidence in wildlife crime cases could be safely held and monitored. "We need to move them tonight," Boone said firmly, "before Pierce can get that injunction signed. I've got a contact at the facility who's expecting us." Rhett nodded slowly. "I agree. The risk of waiting is too high. We'll need to be careful though. Pierce probably has people watching the shelter." They spent the next hour working out the details. Greer would prepare Sparrow and the pups for transport while maintaining their regular care schedule, making everything appear normal to any watching eyes. Boone would arrange for an unmarked vehicle, one that wouldn't draw attention. Rhett would coordinate with the state facility, ensuring everything was ready for their arrival. "Midnight," Boone confirmed, checking his watch. "The streets will be quiet, and we can use the back access road. We'll need to take different routes, throw off any tail that might try to follow." Greer looked down at Sparrow and her pups, particularly at Flint with his distinctive mismatched eyes. The tiny family had no idea they were at the center of what could be a major wildlife crime investigation. They only knew the safety and care they'd found here at the shelter. "I'll start getting them ready," she said, her voice firm with determination. "Extra blankets, their favorite toys, enough formula, and supplies for several days. We're not taking any chances." As Boone and Rhett left to make their preparations, Greer began gathering what they'd need for the transfer. Her hands moved efficiently, but her mind was racing with the implications of what they'd discovered. The small puncture wound and that tiny bit of blue dye had transformed this from a simple custody dispute into something far more serious, a potential criminal enterprise that had been operating right under their noses. She thought about Pierce's confident manner when he'd first arrived at the shelter, demanding the dogs. It hadn't been the attitude of someone simply claiming a lost pet. It had been the desperation of a man trying to cover his tracks. Throughout the day, Greer maintained her normal routine, giving no outward sign that anything was different. She fed the animals, cleaned the kennels, and helped visitors just as she always did. But her eyes constantly scanned for unfamiliar vehicles or people lingering too long in the parking lot. As evening approached, she began the subtle work of preparing for their midnight journey. Extra padding in the transport crates, water bottles filled and secured, medical records carefully copied and stored in a waterproof folder. Each detail could make the difference between success and failure. Sparrow seemed to sense something was different, watching Greer with intelligent eyes as she moved around the pen. The mother dog had come so far from the frightened, injured stray they'd first taken in. Now she was the key to exposing what could be a significant wildlife crime and possibly saving other animals from the same fate. Greer checked her watch. 6 hours until midnight. 6 hours to ensure everything was perfect for their escape. She took a deep breath, steadying herself for the challenge ahead. The discovery of that dart wound and blue dye had changed everything, and now they were in a race against time to protect these animals and expose the truth. The midnight rain drummed against the windshield as Greer peered through the darkness, her hands gripping the passenger seat handle. The wipers squeaked back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the downpour. In the back of the truck, safely secured in their travel crates, Sparrow and her pups rested quietly, with little Flint curled up against his mother. Boone drove carefully, keeping the headlights on low beam to avoid drawing attention. Behind them, Rhett's truck followed at a steady distance, creating a protective convoy for their precious cargo. The plan had seemed simple enough: transfer the dogs to a secure state facility before Pierce could execute his court order. But now, with the storm raging and visibility near zero, Greer's stomach churned with worry. "Weather's getting worse," Boone muttered, leaning forward to squint through the rain-streaked glass. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as they approached the old Cypress Bridge, a narrow one-lane crossing that spanned the swollen river below. Greer checked her phone again. "We're almost halfway there. Just need to get across this bridge," and her words cut off as two sets of headlights suddenly appeared ahead of them, blocking the bridge's entrance. "That's not good," Boone said quietly, slowing the truck. Behind them, Rhett flashed his lights once, their agreed-upon warning signal. The trucks ahead revved their engines, their high beams cutting through the rain like searchlights. Greer's heart pounded as she recognized the distinctive grille of Pierce's ranch vehicles. "It's them. They must have figured out our route." Boone's jaw tightened. "Hold on tight." He pressed forward, hoping to intimidate the blockers into backing down. But the opposing trucks didn't budge. Instead, they spread apart slightly, creating a narrow gauntlet on the bridge's wooden planks. With no choice but to proceed, they inched forward. The bridge's ancient boards creaked under their weight, and the river roared 20 feet below, swollen from days of rain. Greer could hear Sparrow whining softly from her crate. Halfway across it happened. One of Pierce's trucks suddenly swerved toward them, its metal side scraping against their truck with an ear-splitting screech. Behind them, another vehicle veered sharply, forcing Rhett's truck dangerously close to the guardrail. A terrified yelp pierced the air. Flint, scared by the impact. Without thinking, Greer unbuckled her seatbelt and scrambled toward the back of the cab. "The crates are shifting." "Greer, don't." Boone's warning came too late as she was already moving. Truck fishtailed on the slick boards as another impact rattled them. Greer reached the crates just as they started to slide. She wrapped her arms around Flint's carrier, using her body as a shield while bracing her shoulder against the passenger door. The metal was cold and wet against her skin, but she held firm. Boone fought with the wheel, trying to counter their sideways slide. The river's roar seemed to grow louder, mixing with the sound of screeching tires and grinding metal. Rain poured in through Greer's partially opened window, soaking her clothes, but she didn't dare move from her protective position. Through the chaos, a new sound cut through the night, police sirens growing closer. The piercing wail echoed off the surrounding hills, and immediately, the attacking vehicle's behavior changed. Their headlights dimmed, and they began to retreat. "They're running," Boone announced, finally managing to straighten out the truck. Pierce's people won't risk being caught in the act. The opposing trucks peeled away into the darkness, leaving Boone and Rhett's vehicles alone on the bridge. Greer stayed frozen in place for several more moments, her arms still wrapped protectively around Flint's crate, her heart thundering in her chest. "You okay?" Boone asked softly, reaching over to touch her shoulder. Greer nodded, though her whole body was shaking. She carefully checked each crate. All the dogs were frightened but unharmed. Sparrow pressed her nose against the carrier door, whimpering until Greer slipped her fingers through the grate to reassure her. They waited on the bridge until Rhett could pull up alongside them. His face was pale in the dim light as he got out to check their vehicles for damage. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, but they were all thoroughly soaked. "Everyone all right?" Rhett called out, his voice tight with concern. "We're okay," Greer responded, though her voice trembled. "The dogs are scared but safe." They did a quick assessment of both trucks. Scrapes and dents marked where Pierce's vehicles had made contact, but nothing seemed seriously damaged. The sirens had faded into the distance. Whoever had been responding, to what call, they hadn't been coming for this incident. Without further discussion, they resumed their journey, moving more cautiously now through the rain. The remainder of the drive passed in tense silence, each of them processing what had just happened. Pierce's willingness to use such dangerous tactics had shaken them all. When they finally pulled into the secure facility's gated entrance, Greer's legs were wobbly as she stepped down from the truck. The reality of what they'd just survived hit her full force. Pierce hadn't just threatened them. He'd tried to run them off a bridge. This wasn't just about custody of some dogs anymore. This was something far more dangerous. The facility's security lights cast harsh shadows as they began unloading the crates. Greer's clothes were still dripping, and she could see Boone and Rhett were equally soaked. But as she helped carry Sparrow's crate inside, she felt a fierce determination replace her fear. Pierce had shown his true colors tonight, and in doing so, had only strengthened her resolve to protect these animals and expose whatever dark secret he was trying to hide. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the secure state facility's laboratory, casting long shadows across the pristine white countertops. Greer sat perched on a metal stool, her fingers drumming nervously against her coffee cup while Rhett reviewed the DNA results on his computer screen. The events of last night's harrowing bridge encounter still had her nerves on edge. "There's no doubt about it," Rhett announced, his voice carrying a mix of professional certainty and personal concern. "Flint's DNA shows clear markers matching a licensed Red Wolf bloodline." He swiveled his computer screen so Greer and Boone could see the complex charts and graphs. Greer leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Rhett explained, adjusting his glasses, "that one of Flint's parents was a Red Wolf, specifically one from a protected breeding program. And here's where it gets interesting." He pulled up another file. "These markers match perfectly with a Red Wolf that was reported missing from Pierce's preserve 6 months ago." Boone crossed his arms, his weathered face darkening. "The storm incident?" "Exactly," Rhett confirmed. Pierce filed a report claiming one of his licensed Red Wolves escaped during that big storm last February. Made quite a show of it too, sent out press releases, offered rewards. Greer's mind raced back to that time. She remembered seeing the news coverage, Pierce's concerned face plastered across local media as he posed for cameras, apparently devastated by the loss of the endangered animal. "Wait a minute," she said, reaching for her tablet. She quickly pulled up archived news articles about the missing wolf, scrolling through until she found what she was looking for, a promotional image Pierce had circulated showing the supposedly lost wolf. "Look at this." She zoomed in on the wolf's ear in the photo, then glanced at recent pictures she'd taken of Flint. The distinctive notch pattern was unmistakable, but something about the promotional image seemed off. The photo's been manipulated, she realized, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look at the edges around the ear. It's a crude crop job." He took a regular red wolf photo and modified it to match whatever story he was spinning. Rhett leaned in closer, his expression growing more serious by the second. "You're right. This isn't just sloppy documentation, it's deliberate deception. He didn't lose that wolf at all, did he?" Boone's question hung heavy in the air. "He used it for breeding." The implication sent a chill down Greer's spine. Pierce hadn't lost his licensed red wolf in any storm. He had intentionally used it for illegal breeding with domestic dogs, creating hybrid offspring like Flint. The missing wolf report had been nothing but a cover story. Rhett began typing furiously at his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm formalizing these findings right now. We need everything documented properly. The DNA results, the photo comparison, the timeline of Pierce's report versus when Sparrow was found." Boone pulled out his phone and started making calls. "I'm contacting the state wildlife authorities. We need to establish a proper evidence chain immediately." He stepped outside the lab to handle the calls, his voice muffled through the glass walls, but his purpose clear. Greer sat back, her mind whirling with the implications. Little Flint, with his unusual looks and gentle nature, wasn't just a strange puppy. He was living proof of Pierce's illegal operation. His very existence demonstrated prohibited breeding between protected species and domestic dogs, a serious violation of both state and federal wildlife laws. "This is why Pierce was so desperate to get his hands on the litter," she said softly. "Flint is evidence that could bring down his whole operation." Rhett nodded grimly. "And explains why he was willing to run us off the road last night. There's serious money in illegal exotic animal breeding. Pierce has everything to lose if this gets out." Boone returned to the lab, his face set with determination. "State authorities are sending a team. They want everything: DNA results, photos, documentation, chain of custody for the pups. They're taking this very seriously." For the next several hours, the trio worked methodically to organize their evidence. Rhett compiled comprehensive reports on the DNA analysis, including detailed explanations of how Flint's genetic markers matched the supposedly lost red wolf. Boone documented every interaction with Pierce, from his first appearance at the shelter to the bridge incident, creating a timeline that painted a clear picture of escalating threats and intimidation. Greer focused on photographing and cataloging Flint's physical characteristics that showed his hybrid nature, the distinctive ear notch that matched Pierce's manipulated photo, the unusual eye coloring, the wolf-like proportions that had first caught their attention. Each piece of evidence was carefully labeled and logged as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Greer took a moment to check on Sparrow and her pups in their secure kennel. Flint was nursing alongside his siblings, blissfully unaware of his role in exposing a criminal enterprise. Looking at his tiny form, Greer felt her resolve harden like steel. "We're going to protect you," she whispered to the pups. "All of you. And we're going to make sure Pierce can't hurt any more animals." Back in the lab, Rhett was finishing his final report. "This is solid evidence," he said, his voice carrying a note of quiet triumph. "Pierce can try to fight it in court, but the DNA doesn't lie. And with the photo manipulation, the false report about the missing wolf, the attack on the bridge, it builds a compelling case. It won't be easy," Boone cautioned. Pierce has money, influence, and friends in high places. He'll fight this with everything he's got. Greer straightened her shoulders, feeling stronger than she had in days. Then we'll fight harder. We have the truth on our side, and we have proof. If we can survive whatever legal battles he throws at us, we can dismantle his whole operation. The morning sun now streamed fully through the windows, illuminating the lab and all their carefully gathered evidence. What had started with one unusual puppy had led them to uncover something much bigger, a criminal enterprise hiding behind a respected name, endangering protected species for profit. Rhett placed a gentle hand on Greer's shoulder. You did good work here. Following your instincts about Flint, standing up to Pierce, it all led to this. Boone nodded in agreement. Now we just have to see it through. Make sure justice is served, both for the animals and for everyone Pierce has threatened. Looking at their gathered evidence, at the proof of Pierce's crimes laid out before them, Greer felt a mix of determination and hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but they had what they needed to fight back. Flint's unusual heritage, once a mystery, was now the key to exposing the truth and protecting countless other animals from exploitation. Greer's heart pounded as she stood outside the small employee break room at Pierce's preserve. Through the scratched window, she could see her younger brother Nate hunched over a worn plastic table, his work boots scuffing nervously against the linoleum floor. She hadn't wanted to believe it when Boone mentioned seeing Nate's truck at the preserve, but here he was, somehow tangled up in all of this. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The hinges creaked, making Nate's head snap up. His face, still boyish at 22, drained of color when he saw her. Greer? What are you doing here? His voice cracked slightly. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, studying his familiar features, the same dark hair and green eyes they'd inherited from their mother. I think you know why I'm here. Nate, we need to talk about what's been happening at the preserve. Nate's shoulders slumped. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, not meeting her eyes. I didn't know at first, I swear. It was just a job, deliver feed, clean pens, basic stuff. But then you saw something, Greer prompted gently. He nodded, swallowing hard. About 3 months ago, Pierce had me start taking feed down to this fenced area in the back ravine. There was, he paused, his voice dropping. There was a wolf there, in a pen. I told myself it must be temporary, maybe for rehabilitation or something. But the way they kept it hidden, Greer leaned forward. Did you ever see anyone working with the wolf? Any vehicles coming or going? Sometimes at night, I'd see lights down there. And there was this guy who'd show up, never got his name, but he carried trank gear. Nate's hands were shaking slightly. Last week, I overheard Pierce talking about successful breeding trials. That's when I started putting it together. But I didn't know what to do. You're doing the right thing now, Greer assured him, reaching across to squeeze his arm. But Nate, we need you to make an official statement. This could help us get a warrant. His eyes widened with fear. Pierce will know it was me. I'll lose my job. You could face worse if this continues and gets traced back to you later. Greer said firmly. This is illegal, Nate, and dangerous. They tried to run us off the road last night. What? Nate straightened, protective instinct flaring. Are you okay? I'm fine. But this is serious. We need your help to stop it. Nate was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. Finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll do it. Tell me what you need. Within the hour, Boone arrived with a recorder and proper forms. They sat with Nate as he detailed everything he'd witnessed, feeding schedules, vehicle descriptions, conversations overheard. His hands trembled, but his voice stayed steady as he signed his statement. This is exactly what we needed, Boone said, carefully storing the documents. With this insider corroboration, we can approach Judge Martinez in the next county. She's straight as an arrow. Pierce can't touch her. Rhett arrived shortly after. Having coordinated with federal wildlife officials, they gathered around a table in the back office, spreading out maps of the preserve. "We'll need multiple teams," Red explained, marking entry points with red dots. "Federal observers at each location to ensure everything's by the book. No room for Pierce to claim procedural errors." Greer studied the ravine area Nate had described. "What about Sparrow and the pups?" "They stay secured at the state facility," Boone assured her. "Extra security detail is already in place. We're not taking any chances." They worked late into the evening, refining every detail. Evidence logs were prepared, routes mapped, roles assigned. Rhett would coordinate with the federal teams while Boone led local law enforcement. Greer would guide them to key locations based on Nate's information. "Dawn operation," Boone confirmed, checking his watch. "Everyone gets their rest tonight. We move at first light." As they packed up, Nate pulled Greer aside. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have said something sooner." Greer hugged him tight. "You're saying something now. That's what matters." She watched him drive away, her brother's courage giving her renewed strength. They had what they needed now: proper authority, federal backup, and inside knowledge of Pierce's operation. Tomorrow would change everything. The team dispersed to get what sleep they could, each understanding the weight of what lay ahead. One mistake could unravel months of work. But as Greer drove back to check on Sparrow and her pups one last time, she felt a calm certainty. They would do this right. They would end Pierce's illegal operation. And they would make sure no more wolves ended up in hidden pens, being used for his twisted breeding schemes to dot at the facility. She found Sparrow curled protectively around her pups, Flint's distinctive gray form nestled against her side. "Just hold on," she whispered to them. "By tomorrow night, this will all be over." She double-checked every lock, reviewed the security protocols one final time, and finally headed home to try to rest. Tomorrow would require all her focus, all her strength. But for the first time since this began, she felt truly confident. With Nate's testimony, they had the key they needed to bring Pierce's operation down, legally, properly, and completely. The night settled around Cedar Trace, stars scattered across the dark sky. In various homes, the team members prepared for what dawn would bring. Evidence folders were organized, gear was checked, phones were set to silent. They had one chance to do this right. Together, they would make it count. The morning sun crept over the horizon as the task force assembled at the gates of Pierce Preserve. Greer's heart hammered in her chest as she watched federal agents and local officers take their positions. The metallic click of weapons being checked and radios crackling with quiet commands filled the crisp dawn air. "Remember," Boone said softly beside her, "your priority is animal welfare. Let the officers handle security." Greer nodded, clutching her medical kit. She'd spent the night memorizing the preserve's layout from Nate's descriptions, preparing for whatever condition they might find the animals in. The teams moved in with practiced precision, securing outbuildings one by one. Greer followed closely behind, scanning for signs of animal distress. The first few buildings yielded nothing unusual, just standard ranch equipment and feed storage. Then they reached a weathered barn near the back of the property. Behind a false panel in the wall, officers discovered hidden kennels, professional-grade containment units clearly designed for large canids. Greer's breath caught as she examined the setup. These weren't normal dog runs. These were specifically built to house wolves, over here. Called one of the federal agents. A locked cabinet yielded a cache of tranquilizer guns and darts, matching the mark they'd found on Sparrow. Beside them lay meticulously kept logs, consulting payments recorded in neat columns, dates and amounts that painted a clear picture of illegal breeding operations. Rhett moved methodically through the space, photographing everything. His camera clicked rapidly as he documented tags, blue dye matching what they'd found on Flint, and equipment clearly meant for handling wild animals. "Listen to this," Boone said. flipping through a leather-bound inventory book. Red Wolf female, tag number RF789, logged in March. Lost during storm in April. He looked up meaningfully. Matches exactly when that wolf went missing from the license program. Greer felt her shoulders relax slightly as the evidence mounted. Everything they'd suspected was here. Proof of the illegal breeding operation. Documentation of Pierce's deception. Physical evidence linking directly to Sparrow and Flint's case. The investigation that had started with one unusual puppy had led them straight to the truth. For the first time since finding Sparrow and her litter, Greer allowed herself to feel real hope. The danger wasn't over, but with each piece of evidence collected and cataloged, their case grew stronger. She could almost see a future where Sparrow and Flint were truly safe, protected by the full weight of federal law, rather than just her determination to keep them from harm. Just as the morning's apparent victory seemed secure, the sharp crunch of tires on gravel shattered the calm. A convoy of black SUVs rolled up to the preserve's main gate, kicking up dust in their wake. Greer's heart sank as she watched men in dark suits emerge, followed by a team wearing private security uniforms. "Everyone hold positions," Boone called out, his voice steady but tense. He moved to intercept the approaching group, his weathered face set in determined lines. A man in an expensive suit thrust a paper toward Boone. "We have a county injunction ordering an immediate halt to this search and the return of all property to Mr. Pierce." His voice carried the practiced smoothness of an expensive lawyer. Greer instinctively tightened her hold on Flint, who whimpered softly in her arms. Sparrow pressed against her legs, the mother dog's body tense and alert. The morning sun that had seemed so promising minutes ago now felt harsh and exposing. Cameras appeared, local news crews, who must have been tipped off. Their lenses swung between the confrontation at the gate and the ongoing evidence collection. "Hungry for drama. Our warrant comes from the state level," Rhett stated firmly, joining Boone at the perimeter. He held up their documentation. "We're operating under proper authority." The lawyer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The county judge disagrees. This is a local matter involving private property rights." More security personnel spread out along the fence line, their stance casual but message clear. They were ready to move in if ordered. The evidence technicians paused in their work, looking uncertainly between the confrontation and their partially packed boxes of documents. Boone pulled Rhett aside, their heads bent together in urgent conference. Greer could see them comparing the paperwork, making quick phone calls, their expressions growing more concerned with each passing minute. "Ma'am," one of the security team called to Greer, "those animals need to be returned to Mr. Pierce's custody immediately." Greer took a step backward, keeping herself between the men and the dogs. "They're evidence in an ongoing investigation," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite her racing heart. The lawyer's voice cut across the tension. "Evidence of what? A legitimate business owner recovering his stolen property? Those animals belong to the preserve. They're evidence of illegal breeding practices," Rhett countered, rejoining the confrontation. "And we have DNA proof. More vehicles arrived, Pierce's truck among them." He stepped out looking immaculate despite the early hour, his confident smile a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around him. "This is what happens when amateurs try to play detective," Pierce announced loudly enough for the news cameras to catch. "My preserve operates fully within the law. This harassment ends now." Boone was still on his phone, speaking in urgent tones with someone who might be able to clarify the jurisdictional mess. Greer could see the strain in his face as he tried to navigate the legal tangle that threatened to unravel their careful work. The security team began moving closer, their formation tightening. One reached for Sparrow's leash, but Greer pulled back sharply. "Don't touch her," she warned, her voice low but fierce. "Greer," Rhett called, "bring them inside." He gestured to one of the outbuildings they'd already searched, offering temporary sanctuary from the increasing pressure at the perimeter. She hurried the dogs into the building, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see the confrontation continuing to escalate. Pierce was playing to the cameras now, portraying himself as the victim of overzealous officials while his lawyer brandished the injunction like a weapon. The state warrant should supersede county jurisdiction, Red explained quietly, joining her in the building. But Pierce has influence with the local judge. He's trying to create enough chaos and uncertainty to force us to back down. We can't let him take them back, Greer whispered, watching Flint nestle closer to his mother. You've seen the evidence. You know what he's doing here. Outside, voices grew louder. The security team was now demanding access to the buildings to secure the property. Officers formed a line, holding their position but clearly uncertain about how far their authority extended under the conflicting orders. Boone's voice cut through the tension. Everyone stand down. He strode through the chaos, paper in hand. I'm on with the state judge right now. Nobody touches anything until we get this sorted out. The next hour stretched like taffy, filled with tense phone calls and legal arguments. Pierce remained by his truck, watching with calculated patience as his lawyers tried to dismantle the investigation piece by piece. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of uncertainty. Greer stayed with the dogs, knowing they represented the most vulnerable point in their case. If Pierce managed to regain custody of Sparrow and Flint, the physical proof of his illegal breeding program would disappear. She could read the same worry in Rhett's face as he divided his attention between the legal battle outside and the evidence they'd collected. We're not leaving, Boone assured them during a brief check-in. The state warrant gives us authority to complete our search. Pierce is just trying to create enough confusion to make us doubt ourselves. But doubt had already crept in, around the edges of their operation. Evidence technicians worked more slowly now, careful to document everything meticulously in case they were forced to defend their actions later. The confident momentum of the morning had fractured under the weight of Pierce's counterattack. Through it all, Greer kept Flint cradled close, his unique eyes and distinctive markings, a living reminder of why they couldn't back down. Sparrow stayed pressed against her leg, as if sensing that their safety still hung in a precarious balance. The morning light grew stronger, casting harsh shadows across the scene. Security teams still positioned along the fence, cameras capturing every moment, lawyers arguing over jurisdiction, and Pierce watching it all with the patience of a man accustomed to getting his way through. Attrition if necessary. They were at a stalemate. The entire operation balanced on the edge of chaos. One wrong move, one misinterpreted order, and everything could spiral out of control. The evidence they'd gathered, the case they'd built so carefully, all of it teetered on the brink while Boone and Rhett fought to hold their ground against Pierce's legal onslaught. Suddenly, Pierce broke away from his security team. In 3 long strides, he reached the transport van and yanked open the door. Before anyone could react, he had Sparrow in his grip, his other hand pulling a pistol from his jacket. Nobody moves, he snarled, pressing the weapon against Sparrow's side. This evidence disappears right now. The entire scene froze. Cameras swiveled, capturing the desperate escalation. Greer's heart hammered, but her search and rescue training kicked in. She knew sudden movements would only make things worse. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her empty hands. Mr. Pierce, she said, keeping her voice steady and calm. You don't want to do this. She took one careful step forward, then another. Her body angled sideways, creating a clear path away from the van. From the corner of her eye, she saw Boone and Rhett moving into position, but she kept her focus on Pierce and Sparrow. Greer whistled softly, the same gentle tone she'd used to calm Sparrow during the birth of her pups. The dog's ears switched in recognition. Easy now, Greer continued, her voice level. Just let her go. No one needs to get hurt here. Sparrow, sensing the opening, twisted suddenly in Pierce's grip. His fingers slipped on her rain-dampened fur. As he struggled to maintain his hold, His boot hit a wet patch on the concrete. His legs went out from under him, sending the pistol clattering across the pavement. Boone moved like lightning. He drove Pierce to the ground, pinning him as other officers rushed in. Rhett darted forward, positioning himself between the struggling men and the transport van where Flint and the other pups huddled. "You're under arrest," Boone announced grimly, securing handcuffs around Pierce's wrists. Assault with a deadly weapon, among other charges. Camera crews pressed closer, their lenses capturing every detail, the illegal facilities in the background, the recovered weapon, Pierce being led away in handcuffs. His carefully maintained image of respectability crumbled with each new frame of footage. Sparrow trotted back to Greer, who knelt to check her for injuries. The dog was shaken but unharmed. Behind them, officers began leading away Pierce's security team, reading rights and logging arrests. The tide had turned decisively, leaving no room for Pierce's usual legal maneuvering or public relations spin. In the weeks that followed the raid, the evidence against Pierce mounted like an unstoppable avalanche. Security footage from multiple phones showed his assault on Sparrow. Documents revealed a complex web of illegal breeding operations. But it was Nate's testimony that delivered the final blow. In the stark fluorescent light of the deposition room, Nate's voice trembled but held steady as he described his role. "I made feed drops 3 times a week, down in the ravine," he stated, his eyes meeting Greer's briefly. "There was a female wolf there. Pierce said she was just temporary, but she stayed for months. Then one day she was gone, and later Sparrow showed up at the shelter. The prosecution built an airtight case. Pierce's lawyers made discreet approaches to Greer, floating settlement offers that would have meant comfortable silence. She declined each one without hesitation. "I didn't do this for money," she told Boone over coffee one morning. "I did it because it was right." Sparrow and Flint were transferred to a specialized sanctuary, where they could live safely while the legal proceedings continued. The other hybrid animals found in Pierce's compound were carefully evaluated and placed in appropriate facilities. Each transfer felt like a small victory, another step toward justice. As summer faded into fall, Greer received an unexpected offer, a position as a humane investigation specialist with the state wildlife department. The role would let her use her experience to prevent similar situations and protect vulnerable animals. "You've got the instincts for this work," Rhett told her as they walked through the sanctuary one evening. Their relationship had grown slowly, built on shared principles and mutual respect. "Plus, you're not afraid to stand up when it matters." Boone surprised her one morning by pinning her old search and rescue whistle to her new key ring. "Thought you might want this back," he said gruffly. "Reminded me of how you refused to back down that day with Pierce. Sometimes the right person with the right tool can change everything." At the sanctuary, Greer paused by the observation window. Inside, Sparrow dozed peacefully in a patch of sunlight, while Flint, growing strong and confident, played with enrichment toys nearby. Their safety was no longer in question. Their future was secure. Greer touched the whistle at her hip, a smile touching her lips. She'd come so far from the shelter tech everyone had underestimated. She'd earned this new path, step by determined step. And she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.